Welcome to the Byrne-Wheeler Report. We are recording this on July 2nd. Good to see you, Bob.
Hey, Joe. Good to see you. It's happy virtual Friday before the July 4th weekend here.
That's right. It's almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit, obviously, where I am. For our European audience or non-U.S. audience, that's 36 and a half Fahrenheit. It's like 97.5 here.
36.5 Celsius, yeah.
Whatever. Crap. Good to see you, Bob.
Yeah, the real question is, what's the humidity?
It's like 90 plus degrees, 90% humidity here. So if I'm looking a little sweaty, it's because it's warm in the East Coast studios of the Byrne-Wheeler Report. Today, we're going to start off by talking about the IBM 1 nanometer, or really sub 1 nanometer announcement, and discuss the Intel Foundry update that they've provided recently. Talk about a lot of the interesting announcements around data center technology Qualcomm made at their Investor Day. Then we'll spend a little bit of time on a host of things, including a bunch of XPU product announcements, some funding, a few interesting things around CXL, and some other topics. So with that, I guess we ought to begin.
Joe, so I did not follow the IBM announcement in detail, so I'm curious to hear more.
There was a paper presented at VLSI 2026 that follows up on their paper that they presented a year ago about their 7A technology, or sub 1 nanometer. And it's maybe the first practical, albeit not production ready, implementation of CFETs, so complementary FETs, where you stack P and N-type transistors on each other. And the benefit of this is that you increase transistor density. And the paper last year explained their technology, and the paper this year discussed about the SRAM cells that they fabricated. And they've achieved 40% scaling in SRAM, so that's a big deal.
So is that 40% compared with like gate-all-around architectures?
Yes. Off the top of my head, I think it's compared with their 2 nanometer process.
Yeah.
They call it nanosheet, but it is a gate-all-around process. The way they fabricate it, it's going to be expensive. So the first thing they do is it involves bonding. There are 3 wafers involved. So you start with 1 wafer, form the transistors. I'll assume they're the N-type transistors, take a second wafer, put down the diffusion layers, etc. for the P-type, bond them together, grind off the backside of the second one to expose the materials, and then you etch the patterns. And then you take a third wafer, put your wiring on that, bond that to the initial bonded pair, then flip it over and bond off the very first substrate. And now you've got a stack of 2 transistor layers plus your metal stack. And this is how you're going to get your gains. In terms of area, obviously, it's not Moore's Law. You're not going to get a lot of cost savings from doing this. But I think given that scaling has really slowed down, the fact that SRAM sees, just for the mere fact that we can pile transistors on top of each other, means we're going to get big density improvements.
Yeah, and SRAM's been something that has struggled to scale. And I remember back at Marvell's Analyst Day, they were talking about how they were able to get superior density compared to kind of the standard libraries out there for SRAM.
Right. I mean, I've been meaning, it's on my agenda to look into that. They're a little hand-wavy about how they actually accomplished that. So it's kind of been on my agenda to look into that. I think the other point that IBM makes with its nanosheet technology is they made a big deal about like offsetting the 2 different transistors. And the way I think about it is, if you have a hamburger where you have a metal layer at the bottom for your power, because we're in the backside power domain, then your channel layers for your transistors, and then your metal layers for your signaling. You can't really stack those 2 hamburgers on top of each other because you'd have like 2 layers of bun in the middle. So like, how do you get signal and power to the transistors? And one alternative would be to run them up on the periphery, but then you've widened your cells. So what they do is they kind of cut the hamburger meat in half, and then they offset the 2 halves, and then they can run essentially contacts or metal vertically. And the result is they have a 4-track wide standard cells. It's a big improvement in density by doing that, and they don't compromise anything by having to do this stacking.
But it requires 3 wafers basically to be bonded.
Yes,
So it's,
I was looking at the figure and I knew it took me a while to figure out that there are actually 3 wafers involved. Fortunately for people like me who have trouble comprehending papers on process technology, there was a convenient picture and it's like, hey, wait a second. There are 3 wafers here.
But
I mean, you don't process them end to end, right? So it's not
right.
like you're tripling the number of layers compared to today's wafers, but it's a lot of wafers.
Yeah, and 2 of them would be at that lithography, but the metal one presumably wouldn't have to be.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the other news from the VLSI symposium was Intel's announcements of milestones around their 18P process and some kind of metrics that they put out for that process, specifically delivering 9% higher performance ISO power or 18% lower power at ISO performance compared to the initial 18A, and then some other enhancements, but that's not insignificant. 18% lower power at ISO performance is meaningful.
Right. What was the performance gain?
9% at
9%,
ISO power.
Yeah. I mean, I think the open question that they aren't really providing a lot of clarity around is the yield, of course. There are concerns that the Intel process isn't yielding. It certainly has a lot of complexity, as is gate-all-around, and it has backside power, whereas SMC has pushed off some of these innovations to later nodes.
Yep, and I mean, we should start getting a better feel for that as the Intel 18A products ramp. I think it'll come through in the form of their gross margins, right?
Right, and those products are there's a PC processor and a server processor, the latter being Clearwater Forest or the Xeon 6 Plus.
I think we'll have a better feel for at least the 18A yields in the fairly near term here. And anyway, it's not clear how important 18AP is to the foundry push, since most of the customers will be looking at 14A, but at least it is significant progress that they're able to report. And of course, there's the fact we mentioned before that the Terafab will be using Intel process technology.
Right, although the Terafab has to be built.
Yep.
I mean, the other thing with Intel, I've noticed, there's been the reports of Apple working with them, which is better than a poke in the eye, and I think there's some mixing and muddying around packaging, so running wafers to create substrates and building some of the advanced packaging, EMIB-T, that Intel has experience with, which would compete with TSMC's CoWoS.L, which I believe is sold out. So there's a real need on the packaging side.
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a bit of chatter about that, but the issue is that TSMC is able to ramp CoWoS capacity a lot faster than they can ramp like 3-nanometer process capacity, right? So for the most part, they have kind of caught up with the demand on CoWoS, maybe not for the latest variant, but it's something that where they can respond to demand relatively quickly as compared to, 3-nanometer, 2-nanometer, where things are going to be on allocation for the foreseeable future.
There may be some geopolitical reasons that allows companies to say they're making products in the U.S. And usually chips are stamped where they're made, but it's where they're packaged, which is why, you'd always see Intel chips saying made in Malaysia. I don't think the political leadership really understands some of the subtleties of semiconductor production, but they like to tout made in America. Next on our agenda was the Qualcomm Investor Day. And for the section I looked at, which was data center focus, it was really the Alpha Wave show. What jumped out at you, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was kind of the coming out party for the data center strategy, because we've been seeing bits and pieces. And frankly, back when they announced the Alpha Wave acquisition, I was kind of scratching my head because we didn't have the whole picture about their data center strategy. And so it wasn't at all clear how it fit. They had the AI accelerator that they had flogged for some time, but not made a lot of progress with. And then they acquired Alpha Wave. Now, at their investor event, they rolled out a clear roadmap. Unfortunately, they branded it all Dragonfly, which I don't get. But in any case, they have now. It
doesn't help in the data center that we were always talking about, like, interconnect topologies. And one of them's Dragonfly. I think it goes back to Snapdragon and which of course is a flower, which I don't think anybody really recognizes. It's this, so yeah, Dragonfly.
Yeah, so I don't get the branding strategy, but now there's a pretty clear roadmap that includes the Alphawave products, custom silicon products, their own AI accelerators, which I think we've talked about a little bit here, and then this new CPU that they've got coming as well. So now we have, I think, the whole picture through kind of I guess their fiscal 28, and it gives us a pretty good view now of kind of how they're going to roll everything out.
And that's their fiscal year ends in what, September? So, and I think that gives them a little, it gives them a little wiggle room if they slip a quarter. They can always say they always meant calendar 28. A little bit of clock skew won't kill them.
Yeah, the other interesting thing they talked about, but I didn't spend a lot of time on, was this high bandwidth compute memory.
Right.
The new stacked memory approach, but I frankly focused on more on the Alphawave stuff and less on that piece. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I do. First, just to go back a step, I would say they do stand out as a company now that's offering both merchant market products and ASICs, whereas everybody till now has kind of been either or. You could go, NVIDIA's obviously off-the-shelf application-specific standard products, Broadcom being the ASIC. So they are taking a both approach instead of an either or approach. So I think that's different. As for this HBC, they talked about it, but there's still some details left. It's a stacked memory technology like HBM, but it is based on LPDDR. So that implies wider, slower interfaces to get throughput. The other thing is there's a logic die at the bottom, and they talked about that they're disaggregating the AI computation from other parts of a function that you might include in a XPU chip. So their pictures have an SoC die, and these are all on like organic substrates, so it's not an exotic semiconductor interposer package, so it should be a little cheaper, but they have their, I guess you'd call it like near memory compute would be at the bottom of the LPDDR stack.
Yeah, so I guess it's going to be similar to custom HBM, where you now have the memory controller in the base die essentially.
Right.
And then some kind of high-speed SerDes-based interconnect, or at least, if not SerDes-based, a narrower, higher-speed forwarded clock interface across that organic substrate.
Yeah. And I mean, the other point is they must have a memory vendor involved with this. I don't think they're taking standard LPDDRs. There must be some kind of through silicon via or something to provide the vertical stack. The other thing was they did have Satya Nadella from Microsoft, that he was their guest star who endorsed it, which kind of implies that it's either going to go in their custom chip or they would use the AI solution from Qualcomm, which would be good for Qualcomm. They've done a couple. They started out with the Cloud 100. They're now on the 200. And the 250 will use this HPC technology, and a forthcoming 300 will use it too. The one thing that's really been notably absent with is any announcements of customers. So, I mean, I think Dell or somebody has an agreement to sell it, but does anybody actually care? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess the news that came out of the Investor Day was the modular announcement. I think I saw you posted something on.
Yeah, so Modular has their AI software stack, and it's a stack, so multiple layers, and they're positioning it against CUDA at the bottom and the layers above CUDA, and its big selling point is that it's cross-platforms. Modular is saying whether you're targeting this GPU or somebody's NPU or even CPU based, our software will abstract all of that away and will provide all the tools you need. And they talk about how they get good performance. Modular gets good performance even on NVIDIA GPUs. So that's a big deal. I think that, software has always been one of the bugbears amongst the NPU GPU suppliers, other than NVIDIA.
Yeah, I mean, modular was not on my radar. Were they actually shipping anything, or do we know?
I don't know. I believe they were shipping stuff, and some of it has been released to open source, and some of it's still proprietary. I think the real question is in terms of widespread adoption. Most AI is Anthropic or OpenAI or Google Gemini, and they obviously have their own stacks. So, and I think the world has shifted. From 5 years ago, there was an idea that enterprises would train up their own models or fine-tune them, and now it's pretty clear you just get one of these generic models, throw your corpus at it, and take it from there. No one's really training or fine-tuning anything at the enterprise level. So yeah, ultimately, what's the point? But I think the point for Qualcomm is it gives them a leg up in offering a comprehensive software stack.
Yeah, I mean it's critically important enablement, as you pointed out. So I think
processors need to be programmed, and AI stuff is programmed at a really high level, which means there are a bunch of intermediate levels that have to be fulfilled.
So I think the other thing in kind of your focus area is the C1000 CPU that they kind of disclosed as being on the roadmap.
Yeah, so that's going to be Orion based. So, it's based on that Nuvia core that they acquired and been putting in their cell phone chips. They talked about scaling up to chiplet-based designs with more than 250 CPUs. So that would be core density rivaling the highest end from AMD and Intel. And the big news there was they said they could run the core at 5 gigahertz, which that's a lot of speed, considering if you're going to get that many cores in like an EPYC, you're probably in like at best at the 3 gigahertz neighborhood.
I guess given the time frame, I'm assuming this would be a 2 nanometer device.
I would assume so. They didn't disclose. This was positioned as 2028, so yeah. It's a ways off. Frankly, it's risky of them, I think, to even give a clock rate number, but they need to get people's attention. And then the other thing is, as you know, with processors, it's sort of like we have 250 cores and we have 5 gigahertz, but
they're mutually exclusive.
They may be mutually exclusive. So especially with CPUs with burst rates, it's like, well, in theory, it could burst to 250 to 5 gigahertz.
Yeah,
for like some kind of instantaneous burst.
So remind me, is the Orion core, is that multi-threaded?
No.
Okay. No. Single thread.
There are only like 2 multi-thread ARM cores that I can think of, the Cortex A65 and the NVIDIA Vera. So
NVIDIA's.
And yeah, like multi-threading is like this whole religious debate. So I can imagine it going either way. The other thing, kind of damning it with faint praise, is Mark Zuckerberg came out and announced a multi-generation agreement between Meta and Qualcomm for server CPUs, which sounds great until you realize Meta has made the same announcement for pretty much every company. So it's like, well, join the club.
Exactly. Yeah. So it doesn't determine who gets the market share in the long run, but it is nice to have an endorsement from a hyperscaler in any case.
It would be more powerful if it was somebody other than Meta. Anything else you want to add about the Qualcomm Investor Day?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. One was just the note that, Tony Pialis, who was the CEO of Alphawave, is now the GM for data center. And so he was the one presenting all the data center roadmap. And so that's noteworthy in terms of what they disclosed about the former Alphawave products. It pretty much just confirms everything that Alphawave had out there. What it tells you is they're continuing all of the products that Alphawave had announced. I mean, Alphawave had been an IP company and was really only getting started building chips. And so, Qualcomm is continuing down that path. They have 800 gig DSPs in production. They've got 1.6T products sampling, and they even talked about when they would have 3.2T generation products out there in 2028 timeframe, and talked about 448 gig SerDes, and they're kind of leading SerDes technology. So now it's a little more clear how and why Alphawave fits into this whole bigger picture, especially when you consider the custom ASIC piece.
Yeah, and I do think going back to whether it's the CPUs or kind of these not so popular AI chips, is they are building blocks that a customer could use to create a custom chip, and they're building blocks that are complementary to what Alphawave brought to the table.
Yep.
The other thing is they did talk about the size of the ASIC business, and that the pre-acquisition alpha wave wins would start to contribute. I think they said billions this calendar year. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I think they've got one. I mean, they talked about having one sort of anchor hyperscaler customer. I mean, what I've seen is these kind of newer entrants in PAM4 DSPs get a little piece of business from one of the hyperscalers that wants multi-sourcing. And so they kind of dole out a little bit here and a little bit there, which if you're Max Linear is a big deal because, tens of millions of dollars matter. If you're Qualcomm, $50 million order isn't a big deal, but it's a starting point. So,
but whatever they have adds up to billions of dollars, which used to sound like an unfathomable amount, but is kind of just the starting point in AI.
Yeah, and until we know more about what comprises that revenue, it's hard to really put a...
Yeah, Tony did he was a very energetic presenter and did a very dynamic and did a good job. But there's certain things where it's like, yeah, we'll have 444... we'll have 400 gig SerDes right around the corner. And it's like, well, how big a corner are we talking about? Because, if they have it next month, that's a big deal. If they have it, in a year, that's maybe competitive, but it's still, it's still good.
Well, they showed it on the roadmap for 2028, which is basically what Broadcom is saying. So I think that was sort of the point, was to say that, hey, we're right there with Broadcom.
Yeah. And then this data center business is growing. I guess the pipeline is big enough that they have a roadmap to revenue growth. So, from, a billion plus to several billion in 1 or 2 years.
The other thing that helps Qualcomm relative to, some of the kind of upstarts here is that they have 3-nanometer wafer capacity, right? So they can trade off wafer capacity from their traditional business for the data center business. And that's not
something about shipping 1 billion cell phone chips a year kind of gives you a little bit of flexibility that other companies don't have. Even someone like Marvell that we see as a competitive ASIC supplier, they just don't buy the wafers.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was a point that MediaTek discussed at their analyst day several months ago. Speaking of which, do you want to talk about MediaTek?
MediaTek just raised their guidance for their AI data center ASIC revenue for this calendar year to $2 billion. And that's, it's a good start. It puts them way behind Broadcom, but I think everybody that's following Google TPU 8 knows that, the chatter is that Broadcom's building the T version for training and MediaTek's building the I version for inference. And so it looks like they'll see the first part of that ramp this year, and it's still a far cry from Broadcom's business, but it's definitely a good start.
They also said they saw that in a couple of years, the TAM was, let's say, at the high end, 80 billion a year, and that they would get maybe, it's like 6 billion or something. So, that's reasonable growth if they're going from 1 billion-ish in 1 year to, given that this is just a starting.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think just like with Qualcomm, it's all about diversification, right?
Yeah, right. And it got me thinking, though, if it's really 80 billion, like, how does that divide up? Is it like 50% Broadcom, 25% Marvell, and then the remaining 25%, you've got like Qualcomm and MediaTek and whomever else taking 6% of the market a piece or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big fear factor for both Broadcom and Marvell is share loss, right? So Broadcom has had all of the Google business and Marvell has had all of the Amazon business, and now everybody's anticipating the share loss to MediaTek or Allchip respectively. And so we'll just have to wait and see what that ends up looking like.
Hock Tan at Broadcom kind of waved off the share loss, saying, hey, we've got more business than we know what to do with. We don't mind losing a socket or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, on the plus side, they've got a significant number of designs in the pipeline from other customers.
Yeah. You've reached the end of part 1 of Byrne-Wheeler Report, episode 15. Please come back for part 2.